It was another ordinary day at the bank. The clattering of keyboards, the soft murmur of customers talking to the tellers, and the general hum of the building were the usual background sounds of my work life. I had been in customer service for a long time, so handling people with various requests and sometimes difficult attitudes had become second nature. But today, I was about to be tested in a way I hadn't anticipated. I was sitting at my desk when a woman walked in. She was dressed in business attire, her heels clicking sharply against the floor as she approached the counter. Her expression seemed determined, but also somewhat agitated, and I could sense there was tension in her posture. I greeted her, but it wasn't long before she handed me a form and asked me to sign it. The form, she explained, was required for an investment payout. As a customer service representative at the bank, it was routine for me to witness signatures and verify paperwork. So, I took the form and looked it over, expecting this to be a simple request. But as I scanned the document, I noticed a discrepancy. The form stated that a bank official only needed to sign if the form was being completed for someone outside the country. If the signature was being witnessed within the country, it only required someone who was registered to vote and could provide their address. I pointed this out calmly, trying to explain the discrepancy to her. I didn't anticipate her response. She immediately began raising her voice, demanding that I sign the form. Her words were filled with frustration and anger. "I've been here all day. I've paid for parking. I don't have time for this. Just sign it," she insisted. I felt my patience wearing thin, but I remained professional. "Ma'am, I'm afraid I can't sign this because the form doesn't require a bank official's signature. It only needs a registered voter to witness it." I could tell she wasn't listening, and it only seemed to anger her more. "You're telling me that I wasted my time and money coming here? I've been banking with you for 30 years, and now you're telling me I can't get my payout," she snapped, clearly upset. Her words stung, but I held my ground. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but the form is clear. I can't sign it as a bank official if it's not required. However, I can recommend someone else who can witness it for you." The woman's face reddened, and she snapped at me again. "I don't need anyone else. You're a bank official, and you're going to sign it. I don't care what your form says. My son's an accountant, and he told me this is the right way." I could feel my stress mounting, but I knew I couldn't give in. I tried one more time to explain, but her anger was overwhelming. She began yelling, demanding that I do what she said, making a scene in front of the other customers. "I've been dealing with this all day, and now you're refusing to help me? I'm going to complain about you. You can't just treat customers like this," she screamed. I was taken aback, but I didn't react. Instead, I just asked for the form back, trying to suggest that we could talk to a manager to figure out the next steps. But the woman didn't care about that. She ripped the form out of my hands and stormed out of the branch, leaving me standing there, frustrated and feeling a bit helpless. But that wasn't the end of it. A few minutes later, my manager called me over. The woman had called in, furious about how I had handled the situation. My higher-up invited her back in to speak with him personally, thinking it would be an opportunity to calm her down. I didn't expect that the situation would escalate further. When she returned, she walked past me with a disdainful look, heading straight into the manager's office. I could only hope that she would finally understand the rules and the form, but when my colleague sat down with her, she refused to listen. She insisted that my colleague sign the form, despite the fact that it was wrong. My colleague, trying to avoid further confrontation, signed it, invalidating the form entirely. I couldn't believe it. That small mistake would set the process back weeks. The form would be rejected, and they would have to send her new paperwork. I could only imagine how she would return in a month or so, making the same demand. In the end, I didn't feel angry. I just felt sad for her inability to listen and follow instructions properly. But there was nothing more I could do. And then, my next challenge appeared at work. I had recently taken 2 weeks off due to an injury, following the doctor's advice. The process was simple. I had to call the company's absence line to inform them of my condition, and I did that. In fact, I called them multiple times over the course of my time off, more than the required 5 calls. When I returned to work, everything seemed fine. We had a return-to-work meeting where I showed my call logs and explained the situation. There were no issues. Or so I thought. The next day, my line manager called me in for an investigation. "You didn't follow the proper absence process," he said. I was baffled. I had followed all the rules, but now I was being pulled in for an investigation. I thought it was just a misunderstanding, but the situation kept escalating. Later, I was told that I had violated a small rule. I had clocked out a minute before I was supposed to. It was such a trivial issue, but it became the focus of the investigation. My manager was scrutinizing my every move, even though I had been an overachiever in the past, consistently working above and beyond my targets. So, I decided to comply completely with their rules. I followed every procedure to the letter. I clocked in only at the exact time, I prepared my equipment only when the shift began, and I made sure I was always on time. As a result, I started underperforming on purpose. I was no longer exceeding expectations, and it was clear that my efficiency had dropped. When my line manager asked me about my performance, I suggested that he send the trainer to observe my work. The trainer confirmed that I was following the exact procedure, which meant my performance was now well below what I was capable of. It was frustrating, but I was making my point. The rules were rigid, and sometimes strict adherence to those rules made the job harder and less productive. In the end, my manager had no choice but to accept the truth, and I was given permission to work according to the hours I had originally agreed upon. The system wasn't perfect, but I had won, and that felt like a small victory. But this wasn't the first time I had been forced to deal with a frustrating system. I thought back to my time working at a private school where I had held multiple part-time positions. I had been working as an athletic director, a substitute teacher, and a gym leader. It was a complicated schedule, and I had to clock in and out for different departments at different times. HR had initially agreed to my schedule, but when payroll realized that I was working more hours than expected, they forced me to revert to a stipend system. I had no choice but to lose 16 hours of pay each week. The situation wasn't ideal, but I didn't accept defeat easily. I fought for the fair compensation I was owed, and in the end, I was allowed to clock in for the athletic director job, although I had to lower my hourly rate to match the stipend. It wasn't perfect, but it was a compromise, and I was no longer losing money. The real battle, however, was the fight I had been fighting for years. My disability claim had been pending for 5 years. Despite being diagnosed with an incurable and debilitating condition caused by years of abuse, the state refused to acknowledge the severity of my illness. I had been to numerous doctors, taken more medications than I could count, and yet the system continued to push me aside. Finally, after years of waiting, I was given a hearing. But without a lawyer, I had to represent myself. I had studied law in the past, so I was prepared. The hearing was only supposed to last 10 minutes, but I made sure it lasted for an hour and a half. I wasn't going to let them dismiss my case without hearing every detail. 6 months later, I received a letter asking for my therapist's notes from the past 6 months. This was absurd, considering they already had notes from previous years. I complied and went to my therapist to request the documents. She knew what I was trying to do and agreed to provide them. I sent them out by priority mail with all the necessary paperwork. Despite my tracking number showing that the documents had arrived on time, they claimed they didn't receive them until a week after the deadline. I knew it was a lie, but there was nothing I could do about it. Still, I felt a small victory in knowing that I had fought back, even if the system tried to pull the rug out from under me. It wasn't over yet, but at least I had proven that I wouldn't back down. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this story resonated with you and inspired you in some way. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that challenge, inspire, and move us. See you in the next video.